All right, so today we're diving into some ancient Roman drama. Imagine a political landscape so chaotic that three of the most powerful figures just decide, you know,
Yeah.
to team up. Not to benefit the people, but to just grab power for themselves. That's the story of Rome's First Triumvirate. And you've sent us some excellent sources to unpack on this. We're talking excerpts from the History Hustle podcast. It breaks down the whole thing, the players, the moves, the ultimate collapse. But we're not stopping there. We want to figure out what this power struggle from like 2,000 years ago can teach us about leadership and the pitfalls of ambition today.
It's amazing how relevant those ancient stories can be, right? You'd think Roman politics wouldn't have much to do with our lives now, but the triumvirate's rise and fall it offers,
Yeah.
like timeless lessons about how power works and what happens when it goes unchecked.
Yeah, totally. So let's set the stage. Our sources paint a picture of Rome before the Triumvirate as a complete mess. Civil wars, economic inequality,
Hmm.
a Senate resistant to change. It sounds like the perfect breeding ground for ambitious figures to exploit the chaos.
Exactly. The late Roman Republic was in turmoil. The old systems, they were crumbling. And powerful figures like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, they saw opportunity in this instability. They were each strong individually, but they realized that by joining forces, they could overcome the obstacles that were standing in their way. It's a classic example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But as we'll see, convenience alone isn't enough to make an alliance last.
Right. Okay, so let's meet these guys. First up, Julius Caesar. He was a rock star,
Yeah.
popular with the people, but the Senate absolutely despised him. He needed military command and serious cash to fuel his ambitions.
Caesar was brilliant. He understood how to manipulate public opinion and use that popularity against the elite in the Senate. He was playing the long game. And he knew that military success would give him the leverage he needed to rise to the top.
Yeah. Next, we have Pompey the Great. He was Rome's celebrated general, a war hero. But he's increasingly frustrated by the Senate blocking his reforms and the rewards he wanted for his veteran soldiers.
Pompey represents the old guard, caught between tradition and the need for change. He believed in the authority of the Senate, but he also saw its flaws. He was stuck. But in a way, that made him the perfect ally for someone like Caesar, who wanted to disrupt the system entirely.
Makes sense. And last but not least, there's Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was incredibly wealthy, but driven by a deep insecurity and resentment toward Pompey for stealing his glory in previous military campaigns, he saw the triumvirate as his chance to turn his fortune into real political influence and finally get the recognition he craved.
Crassus is a fascinating character.
Right.
It's not enough to just say he wanted military glory. I think his story reveals how deep-seated insecurity can drive even the most successful people to make reckless decisions. In Crassus's case, that craving for validation, it led him to disaster later on. It makes you think about what truly motivates people, even those who seem to have it all.
That's a really good point. So, in 60 BCE, these three guys, each with their own baggage and agenda, decide to form this secret pact, the First Triumvirate. It was a way to completely bypass the Senate and get what they wanted.
Think about it. Caesar gets the military command and resources he desperately needed. Pompey finally gets land for his veterans and sees his reforms enacted. And Crassus, well, he gets to bask in the glow of Caesar's conquests, hoping it will rub off on him. It was a brilliant move, strategically speaking,
Right.
at least for a while.
And initially it worked. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul brought Rome incredible wealth and boosted his popularity. Pompey got what he wanted, and Crassus was raking it in, profiting from the spoils of war. But even in this honeymoon phase, the cracks were already starting to show. Pompey grew envious of Caesar's growing fame, and Crassus, still hungry for his own moment of military glory, decided to launch a campaign against Parthia.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Crassus's disastrous campaign and his death in 53 BCE, it completely threw off the balance of power. It's almost as if the alliance itself was built on his wealth and his willingness to be the third wheel. Once he was gone, the rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, it was free to explode.
Right.
But even before that, you can see how individual ambition was eating away at the foundation of the triumvirate.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And they tried to patch things up with a strategic marriage between Caesar's daughter, Julia, and Pompey. But even that couldn't hold this alliance together. Julia's death was a major turning point. It severed that personal tie and left Caesar and Pompey vulnerable to the growing mistrust between them.
The triumvirate perfectly illustrates that. Convenience isn't enough for a lasting alliance. Shared goals are important, sure, but without trust and a genuine commitment to each other's success, it's all just a house of cards. Just look at how quickly things fell apart once their individual interests diverged. It makes you think about the partnerships and alliances we build today, doesn't it? Are they based on genuine shared values? Or just on what we can get out of them in the short term?
That's a really thought-provoking question. So we have this crumbling alliance, simmering tensions, and a Senate that was always wary of Caesar, just waiting for an opportunity to exploit the situation.
Yeah.
What happens
Well,
next?
that's where things really come to a head. The Senate saw its chance to use Pompey against Caesar, demanding that Caesar disarm and return to Rome. They thought they had him cornered, but they underestimated Caesar's ambition. And his response was a move that changed the course of Roman history. He crossed the Rubicon.
Whoa. Okay, so just to clarify for our listeners, the Rubicon was this river that marked the boundary of Roman Italy. Crossing it with an army was basically like a declaration of war.
Exactly. It was a power move, pure and simple. Caesar was signaling that he wasn't backing down. He was willing to challenge the authority of the Senate, even if it meant plunging Rome into civil war.
And that's precisely what happened. It's kind of crazy how this alliance, meant to consolidate power, ultimately led to the most dramatic power struggle in Roman history. So you have Caesar on one side, Pompey and the Senate on the other. Who had the upper hand at that point?
On paper, Pompey and the Senate seemed to have all the advantages. They controlled Rome, they had more resources, and a larger army.
Yeah.
They severely underestimated Caesar's military brilliance and the fierce loyalty of his troops.
I guess you don't conquer Gaul without picking up a few leadership skills along the way.
Right. Caesar was a master strategist,
Yeah.
but he was also incredibly savvy when it came to propaganda. He knew how to control the narrative, and he framed the conflict as a battle between the people and the corrupt elite. He was a populist before the word even existed.
Wow. So Caesar basically turned the people against the very institution that was trying to control him. Did it work?
Ooh, it absolutely worked. His campaigns were wildly successful. He secured Italy in no time, then set his sights on taking down Pompey's forces in Greece.
So what happened to Pompey? He was Rome's greatest general at the time, wasn't he? You'd think he would have been a formidable opponent.
He was. But Caesar was just that good. Pompey was outmaneuvered at every turn. He ended up fleeing to Egypt, hoping to regroup, but was assassinated upon his arrival. Talk about a fall from grace.
Wow. It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? This larger-than-life figure, brought down by the very ambition that had propelled him to greatness. So with Pompey out of the picture, what happened to Caesar?
He emerged as the undisputed ruler of Rome. The Senate was in disarray, and Caesar was appointed dictator for life. This marked the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire.
Wow. The ripple effects of this alliance are incredible. It's like they set off a chain reaction that led to the downfall of the very system they were a part of. We talked about the leadership lessons we can glean from their story earlier, but seeing the full scope of the consequences really drives those lessons home.
It's a powerful illustration of the importance of thinking about long-term consequences. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus were so focused on immediate gains that they failed to see how their actions would ultimately destabilize the entire republic, their alliance. Born from ambition and self-interest, inadvertently paved the way for a completely different system of government.
They were playing checkers, but the game was actually chess.
Exactly. And that short-sightedness had massive repercussions. It makes you wonder how often we make similar mistakes in our own lives, focusing on the immediate without considering the potential long-term consequences.
Totally. Speaking of lasting impacts, we know that the Triumvirate changed the course of Roman history. But how did it influence things like law and governance?
Well, even though the Triumvirate itself was a private agreement, it had a profound impact on the legal and political landscape of Rome. Caesar, in particular, used his position within the alliance to push through significant legal reforms.
So he was leveraging the Triumvirate for his own political agenda.
Absolutely. He knew that to consolidate power, he needed to appeal to the people. So he introduced populist measures like debt relief and land redistribution. These moves were incredibly popular with the common people and helped him undermine the authority of the Senate even further.
He was playing a long game, wasn't he? Using these seemingly benevolent reforms to chip away at the established power structure. It's fascinating to see how strategic he was.
He was a master politician. But it wasn't all just about power grabs. He also implemented reforms to improve provincial administration, reformed the calendar. The one we still use today is based on the Julian calendar, and even extended Roman citizenship to people in conquered territories.
That's a huge deal. So it seems like the Triumvirate, even though it ultimately failed, played a major role in the expansion and centralization of the Roman state. They were laying the groundwork for the empire without even realizing it.
That's exactly right. Their actions, driven by personal ambition, ironically set the stage for the Roman Empire that would emerge under Caesar's successor, Augustus. It's a classic example of how history is shaped, not just by grand designs, but also by the unintended consequences of individual actions.
It's a good reminder that even seemingly small decisions can have a ripple effect, changing the course of events in ways we can't always predict. We've talked about the political and legal impacts, but what about the cultural legacy of the First Triumvirate? Did this period leave a mark on Roman art, literature, or mythology?
Oh, absolutely. The story of the Triumvirate, with its themes of ambition, betrayal, and the struggle for power, became a source of inspiration for generations of Roman writers, poets, and historians.
It's like a real-life drama, full of twists and turns and larger-than-life characters.
Exactly. The lives of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, filled with triumphs and tragedies, were ripe for storytelling. Their stories became cautionary tales, warnings about the corrupting nature of power and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Think of it like Shakespeare, but set in ancient Rome.
So their actions continued to shape Roman thought and culture long after they were gone. It's incredible how these figures, initially united by their desire for power, ended up having such a lasting impact on so many different aspects of Roman life.
Their story was woven into the fabric of Roman society, a reminder of the Republic's fragility and the consequences of political maneuvering gone wrong.
It's a powerful legacy. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the chaotic backdrop of the late Republic to the rise and fall of the First Triumvirate, we've explored the political and legal ramifications, uncovered leadership lessons, and even touched on their cultural influence. It really highlights how even temporary alliances, they can have a lasting impact,
Wow.
for better or worse. But before we wrap up, there's one more layer to this story that we need to peel back. We've talked about the political, the legal, the cultural. But what about the personal? What can the triumvirate teach us about navigating the complexities of ambition and human relationships?
That's where the real tragedy lies, I think. These were three incredibly talented and ambitious men, each capable of greatness in their own right. But their ambition, coupled with a lack of trust and a willingness to exploit each other's weaknesses, ultimately led to their downfall.
It's almost as if their individual strengths became their collective weakness. They were so focused on outmaneuvering each other that they lost sight of the bigger picture, the common ground that had initially united them.
Exactly. And that's a cautionary tale for all of us, isn't it? Whether it's in our careers, our personal lives, or even in our communities. We all form alliances, partnerships, relationships that are meant to help us achieve something greater than we could on our own. But the Triumvirate story reminds us that those alliances, no matter how powerful or promising, can easily unravel if they're not built on a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision.
So true. So what does this all mean for us today? What's the big takeaway from our deep dive into the First Triumvirate?
I think it boils down to this. Ambition. It isn't inherently bad. In fact, it can be a powerful driver of progress and achievement. But when ambition is unchecked, when it becomes more about personal gain than collective good, that's when it becomes dangerous. When we enter into alliances with others, we have to be mindful of those motivations, both our own and those of the people we're aligning ourselves with. Are we truly committed to a shared goal? Or are we simply using each other to get ahead? These are tough questions, but the Triumvirate story shows us why they're worth asking.
It's a reminder that history, it isn't just about dates and battles and names. It's about human nature, the choices we make, and the ripple effects those choices have, sometimes for centuries to come.
We've explored how the First Triumvirate changed the course of Roman history, but perhaps the most valuable lesson they offer is a deeply personal one. A lesson about the importance of self-awareness, integrity, and the enduring power of human connection.
And that's a powerful note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the First Triumvirate. We hope you've gained new insights into this pivotal moment in history. And more importantly, found some food for thought about the alliances you forge and the ambitions you pursue in your own life.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating period with you. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.